How to write a paper, article, or presentation. So mainly these are not to do with the style of presenting, but rather really how to produce an argumentation. Now, today I'm going just to concentrate on the first part of the presentation, but up to pretty much defining goals. So writing a paper is actually fundamental. So writing a paper is actually a quite complex argument because there are many reasons. Some of them they already discussed in the past. And the point is that whatever you have done, there are many different ways of presenting it for at least two reasons. First of all, because when you solve a problem, or any type of problem, you look for a solution. And we do know that this is what you have to do in research, but actually in general, there are many facets, many different aspects to it. So when you write a paper, you have to decide which aspect of the single solution and the single problem you're going to present, right? So these we said already, and this is why we get into the analysis of the audience. But also, once you've done it, you also have to decide how to write it, which is a key message. Even if you have chosen the audience, even if you've chosen, you already have the results, how you present it is actually key. There are many ways of presenting what you've done, because what you've done usually is quite complex with many aspects. You have to decide which is the what in economics called the unique selling proposition. By unique selling proposition, you're going to say exactly what is the one message or one key part over which you want to insist. And this is very critical, because even if you've chosen the right audience, depending on the unique selling proposition that you've chosen, you have to write all the paper according to it, and they have to do all the relative work according to it. So you see, pretty much of our eight items, the first four are just about setting up the process, right? As we see, like you have to decide what is the role of your paper, the audience, the type of paper that you're writing, and then the goals. So all of this is setting up. And of course, you are talking about doing this after you have done the results, right? So after you have done some research, after you have achieved some results, which means now you think you have something to say, you have to decide how to say it, right? These are the papers. So I'm doing all of these. I need to do all of these already, or even you've done all the work. So what I'm talking today is not what we talked about 2 lectures ago. 2 lectures ago, we talked about what is research. Research about problems and state of the art, and solution and evaluation, okay? So assuming that you already done all of that, assuming that you have done the state of the art, because for instance, you did a study, assuming that you identify the problem, assuming that now you have a solution, assuming that you have done some evaluation, I've done the evaluation, right? Now I have to write the paper. But that paper for sure, as I said, has only to cover part of it. So all these 4 items are just to go to the big analysis, all the work that done before, to do something that you hope people will read, will understand, and then hopefully they will cite. So this is why the first 4 items of the 8 are just about this, okay? And in fact, today we concentrate mainly up to step 4, while the step 5, 6, 7, and 8 are once we are very clear in mind what you want to say, then you can start writing. We will say that I'm presenting this as a sequence of steps, but you will find out that actually it's not exactly a sequence. It's more like the usual spiral approach, where you go by successive refinements. So, of course, what you do, you define you do the first 4 items, and then the first 4 items you start writing. And sometimes you realize that you cannot write the paper. Sometimes you realize that when you write down the argumentation, then there's something missing, in which case you go and start again. We get into this point again towards the end where we put everything together, which is step number 7, the process. But all the point I'm saying that that you really have to be very clear in mind when you write a paper, when you start writing a paper, what you want to say. This is why some of you have already started. When you decide to write a paper, you have first you have to have meetings, you have to discuss all of this, you have to make your mind about this. I remember once one student, none of you, came to me and wrote me a wonderful paper whose title was title. So that meant that he didn't analyze what was the main message, right? And so I don't really understand which sense to make to write a paper whose title is title. That really meant that he did not do the analysis, right? He meant to say, okay, I want to write a paper. Okay, write a paper. So you can write everything. But then between writing a paper and doing the work and getting accepted is a big step. Okay, so all of these to kind of warm up. Now let's go through the different items. Okay, so sometimes when I give you homework and people try to write it down, and then they sometimes come to me and say, oh look, I mean, I got an idea but I cannot express it. So and I ask them, do you really know what you want to say? Yes, but I can't say it. I just don't have the right words, okay? This is nonsense. So anytime you're not able to articulate what you have in mind precisely, this simply means that you have not understood, right? And this is exactly why you need to write papers. It's not because you have not understood this means you're stupid, have not have done the homework, right? This simply means that when you go into the details, when you're trying out to write an argument, or you're trying out to carry out an argument, you just did not work out the details, right? And this is exactly why papers are all about. Because you see, now I give a presentation, right? I give a presentation, I speak, in Latin they say verba volant, words fly, in scripta manent, writing remains, right? Because you just talk and then you don't remember what you said, right? But then you write and then you read it and you say, well, I don't really know what I meant when I wrote this, right? So this is exactly why the writing is very important. And it's very important in this perspective. This is why papers are very important, despite being good because we do career on that and so on and so forth. The papers are fundamental because they force you to really articulate what you do and what you want to say, right? Anytime you come to a sentence like this, it doesn't mean that you're stupid. It does not necessarily mean that the analysis you've done before is incomplete. It just means that you have not yet understood what you want to say. You have not yet understood the full consequences of the research. So anytime you have something like this, you just have to say, okay, this means there is something wrong, and you've just to work harder and harder across the process that I'm gonna describe in a second, right? So the fact that you're not able to articulate something means that you're not ready. So if you like, this way applies to the papers, but it applies always, even in discussion. You're not able to articulate something precisely. This means that you have not worked out step by step what you want to say. Because this is really the key point that we want to say. You see, so take the qualifying or take any other paper. What do? You just do research, right? You do research for so many months, and then you decide, or your advisor tells you, okay, it's time to write a paper. Okay. So this means that you have done the analysis. This means that because of your understanding of the state of the art, the analysis is over, and it's time to write. How you write, what does writing means? Synthesis. Means really trying out what are the key arguments that you can make as understood by the target audience that based on your results. And sometimes you have like negative surprises. Like you try to write a paper, and by writing in detail, you discover that you're missing something. At that point, what do? Maybe you do some more evaluation. Maybe you do some little work while writing a paper. Sometimes you give up. You give up, why? Because you realize that in order to write a paper, there is an entire branch of the analysis that you forgot. Or it's like when you ask a paper for review and then people tell you, oh, by the way, you forgot this case. You have to do some more evaluation. That's okay. This is exactly the approach from analysis to synthesis. And the key point here, I've done the, so some of you, some people think, oh, I've done the research, I'm done. No, 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 until you write it, you're not done. Until what you not only you write, but the paper gets accepted, which means that you have written in a way that people understand what you've done. It can actually make sense of it. Then the research is not finished. Okay. So this is crucial. In research, there is analysis and there is synthesis, right? And of course, at each step you do the synthesis and analysis based on the results on the level before, but it's a key point. So writing papers is not, as I said, let me repeat, is a fundamental step by which you try to draw the conclusion of what you've done, and you really try to make them understandable to others. Remember that science is a social phenomenon. You can do all the research you want, but if people don't read your papers, if people don't accept your papers, your science is irrelevant. It could be Einstein, but nobody knows, and so you're not Einstein. As simple as that. So in particular, this is why we start in the qualifying and so on. At the beginning, you have to plan for it, right? For in particular, the qualifying, I mean, this is why with some of you say, let's plan it in time. Because it's not only an issue of just writing a paper, it's just an issue of learning how to write. I remember that I told you already in the beginning, no matter what you do the PhD about, what you're learning about to research, how to think actually, right? Learning how to write a paper is learning how to think, how to communicate, how to defend your points of view in writing, which is actually slightly different skills than defending your arguments in words. So when I say something like that, it just means, okay, because not only first writing the paper is a process or really of learning how to write it. And this is exactly why after this class, after my presentations, which some of you have already started, we do this exercise, this painful exercise, which is the part by which you try really to get the methodology, right? That by which you can learn. So I'm saying 3 months. Now I think I was a little overestimating, but it depends how you start from. But for sure, if you have the qualifying, for all of you, for the all of you who do the qualifying, you should start writing the qualifying 3 months ago. Sorry, 3 months before. Okay, this to say that it takes time. Okay, in particular. Then of course, the more experience you learn, the faster you go, etc., etc. But this is a very tough skill to learn. Okay. So once you have decided to write the paper, so the issue is the analysis of audience. So this is something I heard from someone. First I write the paper and then I'll publish it. Right? So okay, I have a wonderful idea, I've written the paper and then I publish it. This is nonsense. Again, I mean, once you've done your analysis, there are many aspects to it. I already told you in the past, you can take any problem. And for any problem, like right now, I mean, the problem now, I don't know, semantic heterogeneity, right? Almost all of computer science work on these problems on heterogeneity of data. The database work from an efficiency point of view. The linguist work from the point of view, multi-language point of view, multilingual. The KR talk about ontologies. The machine learning and model of transfer learning. But transfer learning, like a semantic heterogeneity, ontology mapping, is all the same problem, which is you have data which are not homogeneous, right? How do you transfer them, right? So the point here is that once you've done some research, even if you are within even if you are within an invisible college, because by default you are an invisible college, as you said early on. You have to think what is the specific conference you're going to, because even within the same invisible college, there are multiple conferences and multiple journals, and all of them have a different perspective on the problem. So you have to understand what they want. This is exactly why I tell all of you, anytime you write a paper, go to the conference, look at the papers in the last 3, 4, 5 years, give me the top most relevant 5 papers. See how, for instance, where do they put? They put the relative work at the beginning, do they put state of the art, do they put at the end? They are more quantitatively approaching, they do more statistical. What do they do? What is the problem for them? And what is the solution for them? So this is why I'm telling now progressive to all of you, you have to plan for the paper. Was already in the previous slides. How do you plan for the paper? You have to know what are the conferences which are referent to you. You have to know what is your invisible college. As a matter of fact, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I created a new folder, among others, which I call places where to submit. If you go there, there's one file, one Excel file per rough invisible college, like knowledge, language, so on and so forth. You have to go to these conferences because you do not choose the dates of the conference. You need to know where your top conferences are, and then you need, or your big level, whatever conference you go, and then you need to decide which one you plan, and then you have to plan accordingly. Remember the previous slide that said to plan 6 months ago, 6 months in advance, because if you miss that deadline, it's 1 year, right? Right now, luckily, there are lots of conferences around, and we have enough redundancy. When I was young, it was not a situation like that. The probability of losing 1 year, was missing one entire year, was very high. But even so, you have to decide this, right? You have to plan in advance. So, I'm doing this for you, but you have to do it for yourself. I mean, remember, I can only teach how to swim, but I mean, I can only teach, and then you can learn yourself, right? Number one, not only that, you have to learn, and of course, in this initial phase, I will help you, is what is the level of novelty of the result. It's going to be a B-level conference, it's going to be A-level conference, it's going to be like a workshop. You know that right now there are worldwide rankings about conferences. In particular, a site, I think is from Australia, where there is huge classification. And even in this department now, when we assign money to faculty members, we have a classification. And the Chinese actually came out very precise 5 years ago. They have a precise classification. All of them are doing this. And by the way, I do not necessarily agree with that, because if you become too rigid, anytime you become too rigid, it doesn't work. Still, having an idea of what are the level of visibility of the conference is important. And by the way, also during your PhD, do not plan everything for like A+ conferences, and do not plan everything for like a B-level conferences or workshops, right? You have to have the right balance, right? Because you can go like in conference like Giunchiglia, you're like 1, 2, 3% acceptance rate. It's ridiculous. I mean, like 97 pages of papers rejected at 100, right? The probability that gets rejected, even if the work is very good, is very high, right? Even if you write it properly, because sometimes you just get rejected because you didn't write it correctly for that audience. So when you do this plan, you have to do your plan, your contingency plan. You have to work. If you work on it properly, it's going to work. I mean, at least so far with all my PhD students and all my collaborators has always worked. But it's not something, as I said last time, that you just go in and you just submit to get the paper accepted. No, I told last time you get a lot of paper rejected. But if you insist, if you have a plan, if you give talks, if you make your work visible, then this is then ultimately you do this. So, what are the parameters like on the audience, right? Audience, what are the dimensions? Pretty much there are many dimensions. For instance, our age. there are like a PhD symposia. That's very good. You just apply in a pretty much very low competitive scenario, but it's still very good because you have to you have to learn how to express yourself. You have to learn how to answer questions. Remember, it's like growing up. Depends on the scholarship, how broad your broad is. Depends on background, which are the tools you have, and ultimately depends on the scientific community, right? So this audience, this issue of the audience is fundamental. And let me just say something that I already told you many times. It is a writer's business to make the reader's life as easy as possible, all right? If the reader does not understand, it is your problem. It is not his problem or her problem, okay? So this is why we are discussing all of this. We really have to get in mind, to really clarify to your mind this fundamental issue of really put whatever you have done in the reader's understanding. And this is very, very hard. And there are many things, like sometimes you do something like this, and sometimes when you write a paper, you do research, you're like the father or the mother that research, and like you write a paper, you want to say that because you like it. Maybe the audience doesn't care, but you want to write it. And of course, if you write it, you get the paper rejected, but your child got into the text, right? Well, and this happened to me a lot of the time. Sometimes you just write something because you want to say it. It's irrelevant, you want to say it. You like it. I mean, you're in love with this one sentence, one paragraph, and you do it. Right, this is what you have to avoid. Let me tell you, why did I say that? Let me tell you the good news about this. The good news is that the only way to do this exercise is to really put yourself in the shoes of the reader. You have to really make a major effort in stopping thinking of your work as your work, right? By doing this, you actually understand. By doing this, you actually realize that you made some assumptions that were implicit in your mind, but they are not at all obvious for the reader, right? So this exercise, which is really making of writing the papers and put yourself in the reader's point of view, is really the way to socialize your work, to make sure that your work is in the reader perspective, okay? And this is very fundamental, right? And this is exactly what allows your work to achieve generality. Remember that the fundamental difference between doing research and doing a project what is the key difference between doing a research project and the project in industry? That in project in industry, usually when you do something, you have to solve that one specific problem. You don't really care about the rest. You just need to solve that one problem. You just need to solve this problem for the customer, right? When you do research, you do the same, but you want this dimension of generality. When you do research, you want to solve a general problem. As such, you like to say, okay, I did not solve that specific problem, but under these and these conditions, what I solved applies on the entire domain, right? Always the research at this dimension of generality, and always the dimension of generality is actually where people is easy to make mistakes, right? This is exactly why you also another major reason why you use the state of the art. So the point of really putting yourself in the shoes of the reader is really one major way of really doing this. And by the way, getting the paper rejected is never nice, but a lot of paper rejections are usually very good. Sometimes you get some paper rejection which is just crap, but most of the time, or not most, but most often, more than the contrary, the reviews actually help you improving the paper. They help you in understanding the underlying assumption that you're making, and that the reader did not understand. So, in respect to the audience, the paper must be self-explanatory and self-contained. All right. Again, why is that in the session of the audience? Because what self-explanatory means and what self-contained means depend on the audience. So, for instance, if I write a paper on KR, on like the inheritance, right? If I write a paper on that, if I submit it to a KR community, if I just write 5 lines on that, the paper will get rejected because they will tell you this is obvious. But if you submit the same idea to the machine learning community and you don't explain what inheritance is, the inheritance I think they know, but I mean like ontological hierarchies, whatever, right? They will say, I don't know what you're talking about. So this notion of self-explanatory and self-contained is very fundamental, right? And so, and you know, and by the way, isn't even the same results in two different audiences will be two different papers. And it's perfectly fine to write the two papers because ultimately the two communities, even for the same problem, have a different understanding what the problem is. And as you find out when you write that, writing the two different papers will teach you something different. Okay? So the next one is the kind of papers. So we said that the paper needs to clarify, to do synthesis pretty much. We said that we have the target audience. Now we're talking about types of papers. Now, pretty much these are the type of papers that we have. Now, TechRep pretty much is a no-dive report, right? We also have a public version of that, but pretty much this is the type of paper that we have. So, okay, so what is a no-dive report? What is a tech report? A tech report is something that you write when doing analysis, not when doing synthesis. So anytime you do some work, and you've done some work, you've done some meetings, but now you have done whatever, and then by now you've written a piece of code, we established some standard, but now we need to consolidate, right? We are not thinking about the paper. We are just thinking, we are not thinking of communicating to others what we are doing. We are thinking to clarify to ourselves and to our street collaborators, right? When you do this, then I usually tell you write a tech report, and then I usually ask you to send me the tech report and then evaluate. To some of you, I say write the tech report because if written well, then your PhD thesis will be just putting the tech reports and the papers together and become the PhD thesis. If you work well in writing, then the PhD thesis, which is one missing item here, is just the union suitably integrated, which is not easy, of everything you've written. But the tech report is really something which you do in the analysis phase, which is to clarify to yourself and to the group, also for future reference what you've done. You know, in science, the most dangerous risk is to reinvent the wheel. And by the way, we reinvent the wheel every day. We're just trying to reinvent smaller wheels, not to reinvent everything. Because if you think about it, even if I've understood everything, if you need to work with me, you must understand what I'm thinking. And I just can't take my brain, but I just have to tell you, and so you're reinventing the wheel, but that's okay, it's part of the process. This is exactly why we write the papers. This is exactly why we write tech reports, okay? So usually tech reports are fundamental, and also there's something else that people do not understand, which is writing a tech report, as usual, is very good for the writer. How many times you wrote a tech report at the end and said, okay, yeah, now I understand better what I did, right? So tech report is the kind of the founding argument. Some people do not write tech reports. It depends on the research. If you do more short-term research, you don't do tech report. If you build systems, if you do something more complex and articulate, you do need to write tech reports. Okay, that's the first one. And tech reports are usually also another advantage in tech reports that pretty much, since there is no evaluation procedure, they are not refereed. I mean, they are refereed by me, right? But my referring usually is either I just look at them and I understand whether you have a good index, whether they make sense, but it's not a detailed referring as I would do when I do referring for like journals or anything else. So tech report is a very good means to write whatever you want. It's a very good means to remind you and the others what are the key aspects of your research, okay? So in a good tech report, pretty much a good index and some dedication in writing it will be good enough. Okay, now the second one, wow. The second one is a workshop paper. Now it's interesting because 2, 3, and 4 are in a series. They really follow, I would say actually 2, 3, 4, and 6 are in a series. Because if you think of any piece of research, even at the individual level, like they can start, a piece of research can last a PhD 3, 4 years. They usually put more PhD, more people on the same topic. So for me, a piece of research, a single piece of research, not in a natural language or something else, may last easily 5, 6 years. We started ITELOS, when was it? Last year. We are at the beginning. We need to grow. Natural language started much earlier on. We started computer vision this year, and for at least 5, 6, 7 years, I have to go on this wave. Then may stay in computer vision, but I move to a new problem, because either I will have failed, or have succeeded, or there will be the journal paper published. Depending on how relevant the work is, the paper published will have been more or less consolidated, and so on and so forth. So if you see this project, then in a sense, you see the level of maturation. If you understand that research actually evolves in time, you see that workshop, conference, and invited talks, workshop, conference, journal, and books are part of the natural evolution. You apply this to the entire research area, but in particular applies to your work as a researcher, as a junior researcher, right? As a workshop, what do you do first? So what do I mean by workshop? Usually by workshop, I mean workshop which are attached to top conferences. For any field, if you look at the top conferences, there are a lot of workshops attached to it. This is not new. I think we started like 20 years ago. When I was young, there was only one conference. And what is the key? Usually, for instance, like the PhD symposia are attached to the top conference, right? So what is the workshop paper? The workshop paper is just it's like initial results, ideas, semi-bagged solutions, right? So the workshop paper is a very good exercise for those of you, for some of you, to start writing the papers, right? It's a very good idea to start your initial ideas. It's not the case that they told you during your first year of your PhD, you should write a workshop paper. Why? Because you need to start writing. I mean, during the first year, you have to write the qualifying, but not only that, you write the workshop paper, you start getting an idea what it means to write, what it means to communicate. And from my point of view, as I said to many of you, learning how to write is not only a matter of doing a PhD or everything. Learning how to communicate is fundamental, independently of whether you do a PhD or not. Clearly, in a PhD program, you have to do it. It's not an option. In other cases, it's more optional. Then after the workshop, there is a top conference. Here I put a top conference because in my group, I'm very arrogant and presumptuous, but it could be any conference. But as I told you, the conferences are ranked in levels. And by the way, there's nothing wrong in submitting to a big conference, whatever. The only point I'm telling you that in the last 5, 10 years, like doing conference and workshop become a business. So what happened, again, this is something new in the last 10 years. Right now, basically, pretty much with the cost of publishing has gone to zero because of there's only the cost of the paper. I mean, the formatting cost, which was huge, now is basically zero. And so there are a lot of independent publishers have come around. And in Europe, but in India, in China as well, I mean, like everywhere, I would say. And now, this is very important that you have to see, you have to understand which ones are the top places. And by the way, there's nothing wrong also in going in, not only in big conferences, but usually big conference. So a big conference, those conferences, maybe they do not have the ranking as the others, because maybe they don't have like a very low acceptance rate, but they have a medium acceptance rate. So when I was president of IGCAI is a major, we had a big fight because I was arguing that even IGCAI had to have like a 22, 23% acceptance rate. Because what is really where you put I mean, there is a lot of ambiguity, right? Even if the reviewer don't do the same work, when do you accept? Just like 1 week rejected, 2 week accept. You accept or don't accept. One strong accept, one strong reject. You accept or don't accept, right? So there was a big discussion. I was arguing that going below 20% was not good. Now we're 3%, right? So now it's just ridiculous. Makes no sense, right? But like a B level count could be like 30%, 35%, 40%. It's still 102, 103, right? It's perfect. Not only that, you know that the conferences, the good conference or the good enough, there are two types of conference. That's a very important one to discuss about the conference. There are the conference which are indexed by top indexers. I don't know if you know this, but there are institutions that as a job, they index all the paper by various conferences. There's Scopus, there is IEEE, all of them. Now, so my bottom line is that if the conference is indexed by one of them, then I think it's good enough. It doesn't matter. You may have a B result today, B level result today, may have an A result tomorrow, right? Doesn't matter, but it's part of the game. Usually, when you go to a B level result, or B level publication, maybe then you don't is not automatic. It's less probable that your paper gets cited. But there are exceptions. I have papers that I published in B level journals, which have like 200 or 300 citations. Why? Because somewhere along the line, one paper got noticed, and then my line of work became visible, and then they read everything. Clearly, if you want to become noticed, you do need at the beginning, when you needed to really make the area visible, you need an A-level conference, which is exactly the hardest, because at the beginning, when you come with a new area, with your new ideas, people have not heard you, they don't know what you're talking about, and so on, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's hard, but that's actually the game. I mean, doing research is not easy. So when I mean top conference, I mean that somehow down the line, we should have a top level conference in that community, right? This is the type you should have. Maybe one with a PhD, but you should have one. But if this one is with others around, that's okay, right? I remember one paper that now I have 700 citations. It took me 3 years to publish, which means 3 rejections, one after the other each year, right? Because at that time there were not so many. So this is what I'm talking about, right? Journal, so now what is the key point of the top journal, the top conference? The top conference is different from the workshop paper because you have to have results, maybe not complete, but you have to have results. You have to, the evaluation, the state of the art must be complete, the evaluation must be convincing, right? Nobody asks you to do to cover the full spectrum, but your argumentation must be sound from beginning to end. But then, of course, you have the journal. Usually, in my perfect, as I'm going to work with you, my usual pattern is anytime there is a top level conference, then we do a top level journal, always, right? Usually when I was working for Ijikai, we would allow to go to AIJ, which is the main most important AI journal, if there was at least like a 30% novelty. Not allowed because the AIJ was independent from us. But in some cases, for the best paper, we say if you have at least a 30% more, you can do it. Of course, does not mean that we, as Ijikai, would decide for AIJ. AIJ was their own business. But clearly, if you go to AIJ, you have like a paper which was ranked very good in Ijikai, and then if you argue whether they have enough novelty, that's a very high probability, right? So this is the standard pattern. And in fact, usually when I did that, and we're going to do it now again, usually what I put in the footnote of the journal paper is part of the contents of this journal were published in Ijikai rather than whatever at the top conference. So this is ultimately the pattern up to the journal paper. And when, in a sense, when you write a journal paper, you could argue that the research there is kind of, in a sense, complete. You close the cycle. Now, one thing which is very important in research, which is a mistake that youngsters do, is that when you research, you keep researching. You never end. You never finish researching. No matter how much you know, there's more to know. No matter how many problems you solve, there are more problems. And some of you, they just keep following, right? But what is the point? The point is that if you keep going ahead without publishing, then people lose you. Then you don't remember where you started. So one key part in research is really to say, okay, now the research is done. This one I need to publish. I need to publish also because if I need to publish, then first of all, I write it, which means I put more time into it. Second of all, later I can cite it. Third of all, later I can use those results. You see, if I write a paper without having the early results published, I can't assume them. I don't have the state of the art. I understand. So one key point is that you have to decide when the research is done. And this is, of course, something that you learn in time. This is exactly where advisors are very important. But when I say that in the journal, the research is finished, I don't mean that it's finished. I really mean that you have decided that you have enough material, you have enough convincing arguments, and you're really much more rounded in the journal with respect to the conference, because in the journal you should be able to argue that in a certain perspective, this research is complete. Research is complete. Okay. So this is why around for those of you who do the PhD, when you get to around the end of the PhD, but that depends on the single stories. As I told you last time, that there is no fixed pattern. You should have like a journal, or try to write a journal. And not only that, as I told you last time, the key point is that in the PhD or in a piece of work, even for me when I started new, it's very hard to get to the top. It's very hard to get to the first publication. But once you're on the top, I mean, it's like when you go up to the top of the mountain. You're on the top of the mountain, now everything's flat. You just write. People accepted you. You can cite yourself. You have like when you evaluations, you have like you can evaluate against yourself. You're in a position, right? So usually what happens is that when you're at the journal level, at this point you can really work and decide, given that you're at the top of the topic, how to exploit. And maybe you can now write a little workshop paper again because you want to say some minor detail that you just want to get feedback. Or you write a B-series conference. Why? Because it's something that you see you can publish, by maybe it's not that top, but it's worthwhile result. Or you can write another top conference because you have a new advance. Or you can write another top journal paper, more or less top. Why? Because it completes well. It's not so core, but it completes well what you've done. And clearly after that, there are books. I started writing 2 or 3 books in my life. I never finished one. It was too complicated. I mean, like writing 300 pages of book is very, you have to have the right mental attitude, which I do not have. Actually, now I'm writing a book, we'll see how it goes. It is the 5th attempt. So anyway, we see, but I mean, the point is really, what is a book? A book means that there are famous books. A very famous book, which is a book which says it all, like pattern recognition. There's this book in pattern recognition was published 20 years ago. Information retrieval was published 20 years ago. Nobody published a book anymore. I mean, you can publish, doesn't care. People go to those. People don't care because you go to that book, right? Those are the very good books. So like Alman book on databases. That book is a milestone. I mean, I think hundreds of people have studied on that. So, but there are also more marginal books. And books I'm saying is when the topics become mature, someone who has the right attitude, the right interest, because writing books is not easy. I mean, systematizing work is a lot of work. Then just sit down and I do the work. Invited talks are different. I mean, when you have done something good, sometimes people invite you to give an invited talk, right? So I don't know why I put it here, but anyhow, talking about what is an invited talk. Invited talk, people invite you. What is the key point of an invited talk? First of all, you're not refereed. You're like an invited paper. You're not an invited journal paper, you're also refereed. When invited talk, you're not refereed. They ask you a title and an abstract, and you get to say whatever you want. It's as nice as that. Clearly, when you do that, I mean, this is my own attitude. I just to give a broad view on things, not very narrow. An invited talk, even in a workshop, you want to maximize the understanding by the side of the audience. You want also, in a sense, to convince that your own work, because in an invited talk you talk about your own work, is interesting, right? So in a sense, invited talks are somewhere between journals and books, because usually, not usually, sometimes, if you're lucky enough and if you're good, or if someone knows you from the program committee, which is also the usual social dynamics, then you get to give an invited talk, which is kind of, we are really put everything together as a kind of intermediate step towards books. So you see now, for each of you, now you have to, in your plan for the next year, you have to decide where you are, you have to think of the topics you are, and what are your targets, all right? And by the way, this is not something you can do by yourself. I'm sorry, I'm still needy, but I need to teach you as much as possible because there's too much load on my side, but you have to do this kind of exercise. And of course, at the beginning will be failures, it's okay. And then you learn, and then eventually, as I said, so far, everybody working with me found good jobs and so on. So I'm relatively optimistic that I'm not failing in the past, but it's painful, right? It's part of learning the job, part of you see, as I said many times, people cite people, right? What do I mean by that? I mean that they write a paper of yours, then they read a paper of yours, then they read another paper of yours, then they listen to talk, because they say, okay, oh, this guy said the paper, I'm going and listen to the talk. And then the second, maybe at the end, you go out for dinner in a conference, and maybe you get to talk, right? So when you plan for the next year, because I plan for all the group for the next year. I have like, for each of you I plan, but then you have to plan for yourself, because you have to learn. As I said, I cannot teach you to do things. I can only help you learn it by yourselves. The point I'm saying is that when you plan, you should not only plan in terms of the number of papers you do, the bullet points, which have become very fashionable these days. You have to plan also in terms of what is the message that you're selling. So who are you? Who do you want people to know you for, right? Are you going to be what? Like, and you're going to be more like on the software engineering part, or the machine learning part, natural language part, more like on the parsing, more whatever. There are a million things. But what I think is very important is really for you, really to think what you want to communicate. And as usual, if this exercise to thinking how you plan your papers and presentations, right? This is generally true. Is also a very good way to ask yourself who are yourself, right? Because ultimately the key part is, what am I doing? Where am I going to become an expert? Where should I push my scholarship dimension? Where should I push my research dimension? Which paper should I read in the state of the art? Ultimately, at the end of this period, no matter what we do next, you will have a piece of expertise. And I'm pretty optimistic about all of you, that all of you will be very interesting to the market, no matter which way you do. Why? Because I think I'm very arrogant. I think we do interesting work, and we have a good way to learn, and so on and so forth. But this ultimately, I can do that for you. But again, you have to do it for yourself. I can't plan for you, okay? So the analysis of the kinds of the papers is as a one kind of short-term dimension, which is how do I get papers accepted, but also one way how do I learn to communicate given what I'm learning, what I've learned. So I urge all of you to, from now on, for the next year, start pushing me and asking me. I built a place to submit Excel sheets. Go there, go to the conferences, read what the invited speakers, read what the key people, read the papers, see how many papers they write that are interesting, they have published that are interesting to you, and so on and so forth. This is part of your growth. And again, I can put in the most positive environment, but it's up to you. Understand? This is no longer, no matter where you are, this is no longer something you do when you're like an undergrad student or even a master's student. You have to decide for yourself. You have to grow for yourself. I can only give you the possibilities, but ultimately it's your game. Okay? Now, moving on. What time is it? Good. Defining goals, I think is defining goals. Oh, that's a very a key point. One paper, one message. If you remember, Ansel told us when he came here, right? This is why we have to do what he said before. No matter how simple your research is, you'll have to have touched when you've done the research on 10 different points. When you write a paper, you must be very, very clear what you're saying. Like in innovation, in startups, there's this notion of the elevator pitch. You know what the elevator pitch is? Let me tell you. So it's interesting. So you want to suppose that you're a startupper, and you want 1 million euros. Okay, and you're lucky enough that you're going in this hotel, and the basement of the hotel, you meet this venture capital with a guy who can give you money. And so you get in the elevator, you all go into the 10th floor or whatever, and they're only the two of you there, and you have 1 minute to convince him that to give you the 1 million euros or dollars, whatever. This is the argument. The title is the elevator pitch, as we say later, elevator pitch of your paper. What is the key idea? And your key idea must be expressible in 5 words. Remember when I said I have the idea, but I cannot say it? No. If you cannot say it, this means you don't know what you're writing the paper about. And in fact, you'll see when you get to the details to write papers, I say the first thing you write in a paper is a tentative title. And I call it a tentative title because then later on you're going to change it. But if you don't know which way you're going, if you don't know whether you're going north or south, you have no way because you're going to go in circles, right? So once I've done all of this, in fact, you have to think of the title. And if you think, as many times I've done with you, anytime I tell you, write an index, even for the document, for a report, write a paper, for the report, for anything, I give you the title first. And sometimes I say, well, this is a very bad title, but at this moment, I cannot do better. And then once in a time, I call you and say, maybe let's change in this way. And then we keep changing. And of course, the longer the title, the more means that you don't know how to say it, right? But then if you make it too short, which is the titles I like, sometimes they become too general. So there is a fundamental balance between on the length of the title, but this is the key point. So what I'm saying is, have you done all of that we said now? Next step, write the title. And so what is the goal? We say that later. And this goal is exactly a replication of what is said for the research. Problem statement requires state-of-the-art solution, requires evaluation because of impact, right? So what is the difference between some of you, like Hadi and Ivan and Erdene, will give a talk on your research. The talk on the research, again, you have the same idea because, research is very simple. There are problems, there are solutions, and there are reasons why you do the research, nothing else. But here, you have to describe some concrete work, right? When you do the research, the research plan, like in qualifying, you don't have to have evaluation. You say, these are planning to evaluate. This is where I'm going. Here, you have to need to do the work. But you see, it's the same game, right? And in the title, in the goal, you have to argue this. And by the way, only one problem, only one message. Some of you, I get them to my office and say, oh, no, okay, what do you want to say? And they tell me, okay, I want to say this, and then I want to say this, and then I want to say this. This is like, when you do shopping list. I want potatoes, and then I want tomatoes, and want a vegetable. No, it doesn't work like that. If I say what you're going to say, just to tell me just one item. Then you can tell me, as in the qualifying, this item can be split in these sub-items, which is, I want to build a tomato sauce. Therefore, I buy tomatoes, I buy onions, and I buy oil. That's the way to do it. But you can't tell me that you want to buy tomatoes, and then you're going to buy oil, and then you're going to buy garlic. You just tell me, I want to do the tomato sauce. You understand? And this is the key point that exactly you have to do this is what I mean, the one paper, one message. Then the message will be articulated as much as you want. If you're in the qualifying, that is argued with many of you, right? Many of you, and some of you said in the qualifying, another example, oh, I want to cook something. No. Cook something is not good enough. You have to tell me exactly what you want to cook. Or you want to cook it like tomato sauce or pesto sauce. There's no choice, right? And then they say related, oh yes, there's some people over there, they told me that they cook pasta. No, that's not good enough. You have to be very precise, right? And so this is what I mean. And this is exactly why writing a paper is substantial. Because over the 10, 20 results, a lot of results, they came out of the paper, you need to find exactly the one which is compelling, the unique selling proposition, which you can argue is correct, which is a tomato. You have to say that you want to cook with tomato sauce, because tomato sauce today, maybe not always, is better than pesto sauce. Maybe in another conference you'd sell pesto sauce, but this conference is tomato sauce, and therefore you need tomatoes. Okay, and if you fail, rightly so, you get the rejection. And sometimes you think, oh no, those guys like tomato sauce, and they describe, no, they didn't like tomato sauce, and they get the paper rejected. That's fine. But usually, if you try to sell tomato sauce to people like pesto sauce, they will give some hints. For instance, to put tomato sauce and pesto sauce together, and therefore you can build a better paper in the next round. So this I think is the goal. And I want to say something here. I already get that example here. There are some examples of why, how, what, and how we need to correct this. Like mainstream paper, incremental paper usual, like a lot of paper in deep learning, most of them very incremental. Like, so why do they do that? Like, they're usually incremental papers. At most, one paper on why, usually the first paragraph, 2 lines. Then a first sentence on the what, a couple of sentences, and then lots of new how, right? This one you're getting a very mature area, right? When you do new research area paper, you have to spend much more on the why. Clearly, the key part becomes the what, which is the problem, and somehow, which has to do a lot of new stuff, okay? So what I'm saying that, again, not only when you write the paper, the main message has to be targeted to the audience, target so on and so forth, but you must understand exactly where you position yourself, right? And the balance between why, what, and how is going to be a balance of where you are in the research. And clearly the vision paper, but the vision paper is for old people like me, then you just spend a lot of why and what, and sometimes you can even get away without any how, okay? So this is examples, and you see where, and we see now in the next lecture, how we can actually get into the details, what this means in terms of the structure of the paper, okay? These are just examples, and I think we can stop here, because I need to go. And next time, assuming that I really suggest you think about these few slides, assuming that we've done the homework, we see how to actually get into the mechanics of writing a paper, okay? Thank you, and see you next Wednesday.